Vienna, 1907, just as the snow began to fall across Schönbrunn Palace's north courtyard, landing soft as feathers on stone and silk alike. Nadetta Norwood lifted her head from the bundle of translated dispatches in her lap, her breath catching as the frost-laced windowpane fogged with the warmth of her surprise. A tall man in an Austrian officer's coat navy blue with silver piping stood just outside the glass, still as a statue, watching her. It had been 5 years since she saw him last. 5 years since the duel at dawn that left blood on the gravel behind the Spanish riding school. 5 years since the man she had once called friend vanished into the folds of war, secrets, and exile. "Ilyas Abram," she whispered. He tapped the glass with a gloved knuckle twice, sharp, urgent. Nadetta rose, heart pounding, and slipped from the warm study. She moved through the servants' corridor, skirts whispering against the walls, and emerged into the courtyard, snow crunching beneath her boots. His eyes were the same iron gray and unreadable, but the rest of him had changed. He wore his beard shorter now, his hair longer. A scar split the edge of his lip. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, was rougher too. "You shouldn't be here," she said first. "You summoned me," he replied, holding up the crumpled edge of a letter, her letter creased and smudged from travel. "2 weeks ago. You wrote, only you know the truth. I need you. So I came." She hadn't expected him to come. She'd sent the note in desperation, after discovering a locked drawer in her late father's study, a drawer that held a single item, the dueling pistol Ilyas had used that morning in 1902, wrapped in a silk handkerchief marked with the imperial seal. "You left," she said, her voice catching. "After the duel. After they accused you of treason." "I left," he said, stepping closer, "so you could stay." Nadetta's throat tightened. The snow fell harder now, clinging to the hem of her coat. "They said you tried to kill Archduke Leopold." "I was his tutor," Ilyas said. "His secret tutor. Not his assassin." She blinked. "What?" "It was your father's doing. He arranged it. The Archduke's real tutors were drunkards and fools. Your father wanted someone quiet. Disciplined. Anonymous. I taught him languages. History. Code breaking. Until he found out." Ilyas's voice dropped. "Leopold wanted me gone. So he challenged me. And you shot him." "I wounded him. Deliberately. I couldn't kill him, Nadetta. But he made it look like I tried. And your father banished you to protect the family," she finished, breathless. He looked at her, snow melting in his lashes. "I never stopped watching over you. Even when I was in Galicia. Even when I was in Montenegro. Every letter you sent to the War Ministry asking about me, I read them." Tears pricked her eyes. "You were a ghost. Everyone thought you were dead." "I am dead," he said softly. "To this country. To the court. But not to you. Never to you." She reached for him then, without thinking, her gloved hand brushing his. The contact was brief but electric. "You're in danger," she whispered. "If anyone sees you." "I came because of the pistol," he said. "It shouldn't exist. I threw it into the Danube. If it's here, then someone's using it. Framing us again." Nadetta led him to the covered colonnade, where the snow could not reach them. Her steps were fast, certain. She no longer flinched at risk. Not since her father's death. Not since the truth began to rot the edges of the court's golden lies. "I've read the letters," she said. "Found the cipher hidden in your old primer. There's a plot, something to do with the Balkan provinces. And they're using your name to move weapons through Croatia." He stared at her, stunned. "You decoded the primer?" "I remember everything you taught me," she said, voice low. "Even now." He smiled, not with joy, but something deeper. Recognition. Pride. A trace of hope. I have rooms near the Cartnerter, he said. Safe ones. Come tonight. Bring the pistol. Nadetta hesitated. She was the daughter of a baron, a court translator, a fixture in the emperor's diplomatic retinue. She had no business meeting a disgraced tutor under cover of darkness. But she would go. Of course she would. I'll come, she said. That night, wrapped in a plain wool cloak and carrying the pistol in a velvet pouch, she slipped from the palace through the servants' gate. She found his building tucked between a shuttered theater and a café closed for the season. The stair creaked beneath her boots. The door opened before she knocked. He took the pistol from her hands, examined it under lamplight, and swore softly in Hungarian. This isn't the same one, he said. It's a replica. Same maker. But not mine. Someone wants us to believe it is. Why? Because they want to force you into action, he said. They knew you'd find it. They're using you to draw me out. And it worked. Outside, a carriage passed. She flinched. You shouldn't stay here, he said. They'll come for both of us. She looked at him, truly looked. The man she once trusted with every childhood secret. The man who once taught her to read maps upside down, who brought her Turkish delight from the souks of Sarajevo, who risked everything to protect the boy prince she had once adored. I'm not afraid, she said. He reached for her cheek, gloved fingers brushing snowmelt from her skin. His touch lingered, just long enough to make her breath catch. I am, he said hoarsely. For you. They left the city that night. On foot, through the alleys behind the opera house, then by rented sleigh across the Danube where the river still held ice. At dawn, they reached a hunting lodge once owned by Nadetta's uncle, long abandoned, its stone walls thick with frost and silence. They lit a fire. Ate stolen bread and apples. She wrapped herself in a blanket, and he set about building barricades against the windows. You'll freeze, she said. I'm used to cold, he replied. War trains you for it. She stepped closer, held out her hands toward the fire, then turned to him. I need to know, she said. Before we go any further. Why didn't you write back? Not once. Not even when my father died. His voice was quiet. Because I loved you. She stared at him. And I thought, he went on, that if I stayed away, you'd be safe. That you'd marry someone worthy. That you'd forget me. I tried, she said. I truly tried. He looked at her, then really looked, and a breathless silence stretched between them. She crossed the space between them and placed her hand flat against his chest. His heart beat beneath her palm, fast and real. Ilyas, she murmured. And then she kissed him. It was not hesitant. It was not careful. It was the kind of kiss that came after years of silence and snow and secrets kept too long. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. You're not going back, are you? No, she said. Not without you. And just like that, the ghost from her past became her future. Ash had settled in the hearth's corners by the time Nadetta stirred. Her breath made small clouds in the air above the wool blanket as she sat upright, the scent of pine smoke clinging to her sleeves. The room was still dim, lit only by the faint dawn that slipped between warped wooden shutters. Ilyas knelt by the window, brushing a finger across the glass's edge to check for frost melt. His coat was off, draped across a chair. He hadn't slept. Ilyas, she said quietly, wrapping the blanket tighter. What are you looking for? He didn't turn. There was movement in the trees at first light. Just a flicker. Might have been a stag. Might have been a man. Her legs swung over the side of the cot. You think we were followed? I think someone expected you to run. He finally faced her. And whoever planted that pistol likely counted on it. She crossed to the table where her father's old folios lay stacked between a ledger and a cracked inkwell. The documents she'd brought, maps, cipher keys, A list of shipping manifests in her father's hand were still there, unbothered. She set her hand over the top sheet. "I remember this mark," she said. "Here." The double line through the initial. "My father only used it on personal correspondence." He was signaling something. Ilyas stepped closer to examine it. "There's a second line faintly impressed beneath the ink. Not part of the original letter. Someone traced over his words." She looked up. "You think he was being watched?" "I think he knew he would be," Ilyas replied. "And he wanted you to see what he couldn't say aloud." She folded the paper carefully. "At the Foreign Ministry, I overheard Consul Lederer mention a trade envoy from Belgrade I whose name wasn't on any official register. He arrived 3 days before the pistol turned up." Ilyas's brow furrowed. "Was he military?" "No insignia. But his boots were cavalry issue. I noticed the toe caps." He reached for the ledger and flipped through a few pages before stopping. "Here," he said. "A shipment of textiles marked for the Adriatic coast. But this seal doesn't match any of the licensed guilds." She leaned in. "Could be a front. They're moving something," he said. "And they're using court channels to do it. Your father may have stumbled on it." Nadetta's stomach tightened. "Then this wasn't about you." "Not entirely. It was about silencing him and discrediting anyone who might pick up his work." Ilyas nodded. "We'll need to go south. To Trieste. That's where the trail leads." She pressed her palms against the table's edge. "We'll need documents. Money. A reason to be there. I still have contacts in Rijeka. One of them, Jurek, owes me a favor. He can forge transit papers." She studied him. "How did you survive all this time? After everything?" "I did what I was trained to do," he said, his voice even. "I listened more than I spoke. I disappeared when I needed to. And I never stayed anywhere long. You stayed last night." He looked at her, expression unreadable. "That was different." She reached for the shawl hung near the hearth and wrapped it around her shoulders. "If we're going to Trieste, we need to leave before midday. The roads will be clear until evening." He glanced at the window again. "We'll go through the forest path west of Vauclabruck. Less patrolled. I'll gather supplies." As he moved toward the door, she caught his wrist. The gesture was gentle but firm. "We're not just following a trail," she said. "We're stepping into something neither of us fully understands. If we find what I think we'll find, it won't be safe." He looked down at her hand, then back up. "I don't want safe," he said. "I want truth." She released him, and he disappeared into the cold with the map tucked beneath his coat. By the time he returned, the sky had turned a shade closer to slate. He carried a satchel with dried meat, 2 canteens, and a folded oilskin to protect the papers. Nadetta had changed into a sturdy riding skirt and wool-lined boots, her hair pinned in a way that wouldn't draw attention. As they moved along the wooded path, the air grew quieter, the hush of snow giving way to the creak of saddle leather and the distant call of crows. Neither of them spoke for a time. When the forest opened near a frozen stream, Ilyas paused. "There's something I never told you," he said, eyes forward. She waited. "The day I left Vienna, your father sent me a message. He said if anything ever happened to him, I was to find you, protect you, and trust you." She drew a slow breath. "Why didn't you tell me that before?" "Because I failed him. And I didn't think I deserved to keep that promise." She turned her head sharply. "Don't you ever say that again." The wind stirred the trees, loosening snow from the boughs above. He looked over at her, and for a long moment, neither moved. "I don't know what we'll find in Trieste," she said. "But I know I'm not afraid of it. Not with you." They pressed on, their boots leaving twin tracks in the snow, and the forest closed behind them like a curtain. The wind stiffened as they descended toward the Adriatic, carrying with it the salt-bitten scent of the sea and the distant tolling of harbor bells. Trieste sprawled below, its terracotta rooftops glinting under a pale afternoon sun, the city stitched tight between limestone cliffs and the restless blue beyond. Ilyas led them along the less-traveled ridge trails, their footprints lost quickly in the thawing mud. By the time they reached the outskirts, Nadetta's gloves were damp through, her shoulders aching from the weight of the satchel. They entered through the old Roman gate near San Giusto, passing unnoticed among the stevedores and market girls. The city had the feel of a place in between Austrian in command, Italian in cadence, Slovenian in rhythm. Nadetta kept her scarf drawn high, her gaze low. Ilyas moved beside her with the practiced ease of someone who had lived among shadows. He led her through a narrow lane behind a shuttered apothecary, then knocked twice on a weathered door with a rusted latch. A boy, no older than 12, opened it, his bare feet pale against the tiled floor. "Is your uncle here?" Ilyas asked. The boy nodded and disappeared into the back. Moments later, a man in a canvas apron emerged, drying his hands on a cloth. His face was lean, weathered, his eyes quick. "You're late," he said, closing the door behind them. "I needed the road to forget me first," Ilyas replied. The man Jurek glanced at Nadetta, then nodded once. "She'll need a merchant's ledger and a customs pass." "I'll need 3 hours." "And a name," Ilyas added. Nadetta stepped forward. "Amalia Varga. From Chopron. Silk buyer." Jurek's gaze lingered on her, then he turned without a word and disappeared into the back again. When they were alone, Nadetta moved to the window, brushing aside the curtain to watch the street. The city felt lighter than Vienna, but no less restless. "I never asked," she said, "what you did in Montenegro." Ilyas leaned against the wall, arms folded. "I worked in a vineyard for a season. Helped translate shipping records for a French trader. And once, I crossed the Tara River at night with a man who claimed he was smuggling icons but turned out to be carrying nothing but salt." She looked at him over her shoulder. "Why did you help him?" "Because he sang opera arias while he rode," Ilyas said. "And because I'd gone 2 months without hearing anything beautiful." She turned fully now, studying him in the half-light. "Did you ever think about returning sooner?" He hesitated. "Every winter. But I told myself you'd moved on. That you didn't need the reminder." "I never needed reminding," she said. "I needed truth." He didn't answer, but the silence between them deepened into something unspoken and unmistakable. Jurek returned just before dusk, placing a folded packet on the table. "Your names are there. The seals will pass inspection if no one looks too hard. You'll need to leave before the morning patrols change." "What about the textiles?" Nadetta asked. "Is there a listing for them here?" Jurek pulled a ledger from under the counter. 2 shipments left the port. Both bound for Ragusa. Marked as wool bolts, but the crates were heavier than they should have been. "I've seen the handlers. They've started bringing in guards." "Do you know who paid for the cargo?" she asked. "Only a name," he said. "Gregor versus Hallstein. Viennese registry." She stiffened. "He served under my father. Filed his reports directly to the War Ministry." Ilyas's jaw tightened. "Then he's the link." "He's also still in Vienna," Nadetta said. "If the shipments are already moving south, there must be someone here managing the handoff." Jurek nodded. "You'll find them near the old naval warehouse." After dark. Outside, the streets had dimmed to a copper glow. Gas lamps flared to life one by one, and a violin's tremble drifted from an upstairs window. Nadetta adjusted the collar of her coat and tucked the forged papers into her satchel. They left the shop by a back alley, circling southeast until the harbor came into view. The old naval warehouse stood at the edge of the quay, its upper windows boarded, the lower ones blackened with soot. They watched from behind a fishmonger's stall as 2 men unloaded crates from a flatboat, hoisting them onto a waiting cart. Ilyas's hand touched Nadetta's arm. That man on the left. I know him. She followed his gaze. The man wore a brown coat, his cap pulled low. He moved with the kind of precision that came from military training. Who is he? Anton Siklai. He ran intelligence operations along the Dina. He never worked alone. They waited until the cart rolled away, then followed it on foot, keeping to the shadows. The route wound through narrow alleys behind the customs house, past shuttered bakeries and shuttered prayer halls. Finally, the cart stopped before a stone house with iron grills on the windows. They ducked behind a wall as Siklai stepped out of the cart and knocked 3 times on the door. A woman opened it, tall, severe, her hair pinned in a style Nadetta recognized from court receptions. I know her, she whispered. Countess Radetz. She was my father's liaison in the southern office. They've turned the old intelligence network inward, Ilyas said. Used it to build something new. The door shut. Nadetta looked up at him. We need proof. We'll get it, he said. But not tonight. They returned to Jurek's under cover of darkness, their steps silent, their hearts racing. In the upper room, they lit no lamp. The city's flickering light was enough. Nadetta sat cross-legged on the floor beside the hearth, her hands still cold despite her gloves. Ilyas sat across from her, elbows on his knees. Once we have evidence, we take it to the Arch-Chancellor in Graz. He owes me a debt. And if you won't listen? Then we go to the press, he said. Or the clergy. Someone will. She drew a slow breath. I always thought my father's world was built on order. But it was held together by secrets. And now they're unraveling. He reached for her hand not as a comfort, but as a quiet vow. I'll see this through, he said. To the end. Nadetta didn't pull away. So will I. Their fingers remained twined as the fire burned low, the quiet between them no longer full of old ghosts but of something steadier, ready to endure. The morning broke brittle and pale, with a coastal wind that slipped through the shutters and made the papers on the table stir like restless birds. Nadetta stood at the window, her arms wrapped around herself, watching masts sway in the harbor below. The horizon held a smoky gray line, and somewhere beyond it, Ragusa waited. Ilyas fastened the last of the straps on his satchel, then crossed to the hearth to check the coals. Jurek's contact is waiting by the salt warehouses. We'll follow the cart route from last night, then double back through the customs yard. Less watched than the main piers. Nadetta nodded without turning. Did you sleep? No. She faced him. Neither did I. He paused. There's something I need to say before we go. She pulled the shawl tighter across her shoulders and waited. I had the chance, once, to expose Hallstein. Years ago. I intercepted correspondence in Sarajevo, letters that suggested he was moving money through the Orthodox churches. I brought it to your father. He told me to stay quiet. Said it wasn't the right time. She stepped toward him slowly. And you obeyed. I thought it was restraint. Now I think it was fear. Nadetta's voice was quiet. My father told me once that some truths are like gunpowder. If exposed too early, they blow apart the wrong walls. He looked at her, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. Do you believe that? I used to. Now I think truth only waits so long before it turns into something else. Neither of them moved for a breath, then another. He lifted the satchel to his shoulder. We should go. They left through the rear courtyard, where the stone steps still held shadows from the night. The city had not yet fully stirred. Vendors were just beginning to set up their stalls, and the air still carried the hush of early hours. They moved quickly, passing beneath awnings and across narrow archways until the salt warehouses rose ahead, low and wide, with slatted roofs and weather-worn doors. The contact was a woman named Leona, whose left hand bore the ink stains of a clerk. She handed them a folded sheet without speaking and turned away. Inside were the shipping records from the night before, 2 crates marked as agricultural equipment, routed to a private estate 3 leagues inland from Ragusa. Nadetta frowned. That's not a trade route. Ilyas pointed to the insignia stamped beside the false destination. That's a private courier seal. Not registry approved. Whoever's behind this has resources beyond the military. She traced the edge of the paper with her thumb. Hallstein wouldn't risk moving arms inland unless he had political backing. Or unless someone's preparing for more than just smuggling. An incitement. A border conflict. Nadetta's mouth tightened. Then we stop it before it begins. They boarded a freight boat shortly before midday. The deckhands asked no questions, Jurek's seal had bought silence. Nadetta sat aft with her satchel across her lap, the salt wind pulling strands of hair loose from their pins. Ilyas stood near the railing, scanning the waves. After a long stretch of silence, she said, "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't accepted the duel?" He didn't turn. "Every day. I would have followed you, if I'd known the truth. I would have left everything." He looked over then, not with surprise but with something softer, steadier. "You were 17. You had no say. I had a mind of my own. And a heart." He stepped toward her, bracing one hand on the rail beside her. "And now? I still have both. And I'm using them." She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a folded parchment, the edges worn. "This was among my father's private things. A request for an imperial inquiry. It was unsigned, but the handwriting is his." Ilyas took it, reading silently. He was trying to expose Hallstein before he died. He was trying to atone. The boat rocked gently beneath them, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the salt between them, the heat of his hand near hers. "Ilyas," she said, if we bring this to light, what happens to us?" He didn't answer immediately. "That depends on how much of the court survives the truth." "And if none of it does?" He looked at her then, fully. "Then we build something else." She held his gaze, then slowly reached for his hand. He let her. Their fingers laced without hesitation. The boat reached Ragusa by dusk. The dockhands offloaded the crates swiftly, with no inspection. Nadetta and Ilyas waited until the cart rolled inland, then followed on foot, keeping to the olive groves that lined the hills. By moonrise, they reached the estate, a pale stone manor with shuttered windows and a courtyard quiet as a monastery. They watched from the rise above, crouched behind a low wall of rock and wild fennel. "There," Ilyas whispered. "Hallstein." He stood in the courtyard below, speaking with a man in naval dress. Neither wore insignia. The crates were being taken inside. Nadetta's breath caught. "We need to get inside. There must be ledgers. Orders. Something that links him to the capital." "There's a second-floor window unshuttered," Ilyas said. "We wait until they sleep." They did. The hours passed slow and cold. When the lamps inside the manor finally dimmed, they crept down the hill, using the cypress trees for cover. Ilyas hoisted himself up first, then reached down to pull her after him. The window stuck, but gave with a soft groan of old hinges. Inside, dust veiled the furniture, and the air smelled of old citrus and paper. They found the study by feel. Inside, a locked chest sat beneath the writing table. Ilyas took out a thin steel rod from his boot and began to work. Nadetta moved to the desk, scanning the bookshelves. One title stood out, the same binding her father once used for his cipher journal. She pulled it free and opened it. Inside were columns of figures, coded names, and a single phrase written in her father's hand: "He who buries truth buries himself." Ilyas looked up. "You found it?" She nodded. "This is the proof." He stood and crossed to her, taking the book in his hands. Then he looked at her, his expression different now, steadied, as though something within him had finally locked into place. "I promised I would protect you," he said. "But I think now you were always the one strong enough to finish what he started." She reached up, resting her hand over his heart. "We finish it together." Outside, the wind changed direction. The olive branches shifted against the sky. And beneath their feet, the House of Secrets began to shake.